Hello, everyone. On behalf of the FAO Sub-Regional Office for the Pacific Islands, it gives me great pleasure in welcoming all of you to this SDG 14 Fisheries Indicators Inception Workshop. My name is Charlene Maria Anthony Sami. I'm with INFOFISH, and we are honored to be partnering with FAO in organizing this Inception Workshop. This workshop is the first of a series of virtual workshops and trainings being led by FAO to help enhance the Pacific region's capacity in monitoring and reporting on the 4 fisheries-specific SDG 14 indicators. To kickstart this important event, we will move right on with the opening, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome and invite Ms. Jessica Sanders, Fishery Officer at the FAO Sub-Regional Office for the Pacific Islands, Apia, Samoa, to deliver the welcoming remarks. Jessica, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Charlene. I'm very pleased to be able to offer words of welcome to the broad cross-sectoral group of participants we have today. So welcome to representatives and officials from the National Fisheries Agencies, National Statistics Offices, National SDG focal points, regional agencies and organizations, as well as others interested in this meeting from around the world. So a very good afternoon, good morning or evening to all of you, depending on where you are. I would like to officially welcome you on behalf of the FAO Sub-Regional Coordinator for the Pacific Islands, Ms. Zhongjun Yao, who is unfortunately not able to be with us today for this event. On her behalf, it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this Inception Workshop, which marks the beginning of the upcoming series of FAO workshops on the 4 fishery-specific indicators for SDG 14, or Sustainable Development Goal 14. The standalone goal for the oceans, or SDG 14, life below water, is one of the 17 sustainable development goals agreed under the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which of course was greatly supported by the Pacific region. Striving to advance the conservation and sustainable use of our oceans and its marine resources, this goal is without a doubt crucial for the sustainable development of this region. As large oceanic states, we recognize the important role the Pacific Ocean has for our island nations, with its vast social, cultural, economic, and environmental values and benefits. The fisheries sector continues to play an important and significant role in the everyday lives of Pacific people, contributing substantially to food security, nutrition, livelihood opportunities, and the economies of the countries here. As custodian agency to the 4 fisheries-specific indicators under SDG 14, FAO is initiating this series of workshops and training sessions for the Pacific to ensure that there is adequate access to and information on each of these indicators. In addition, FAO would like to continue to build and develop partnerships with our regional fisheries partners through the planning and delivery of these events, as well as for our long-term partner, INFOFISH. The workshop series is designed to enhance the region's access to, awareness, understanding, and application of the methodologies for monitoring and reporting on these 4 indicators. The desired end goal is to improve the Pacific region's status on reporting of these indicators to ensure national and regional efforts in the Pacific region are well reflected and reported and also recognized at the global level. We had originally planned to develop these series of workshops and deliver them in face-to-face actual meeting in June of last year. But of course, this meeting, like many others throughout the last year and a half, has had to change drastically because of the pandemic. So thus we've adapted the series of workshops to be for a virtual platform and to be delivered to you this year. We look forward to working with all of you to ensure that these series of workshops are useful at both the national and the regional level. So today we will briefly introduce to you the 4 SDG fishery-specific indicators that are featured in the upcoming series of technical workshops over the coming months. And we'll also provide an outline of the proposed plans and details of the workshops and associated activities to enable you to prepare together with your staff for these upcoming events. With the wide range of stakeholders present here today, please do use this platform to raise any questions, provide feedback, and provide any other information or ask questions about the types of monitoring reporting rules and the series of workshops that will be delivered here. So I would like to conclude by thanking you very much for joining us today and wish you all the very best with our discussions and deliberations this afternoon. And I'd like to now pass the floor back to INFOFISH, our partners in this workshop. Fafa Tailava, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jessica, for that welcome note. So in order for us to have a view of an overview of what's in store today, I would like to now call upon Ms. Mele Taotai, who is the consultant for small-scale fisheries and aquaculture at the FAO Sub-Regional Office at Apia, Samoa, to give us this overview. Mele, the floor is yours.
Right, thanks very much, Charlene. And if I could ask after to share the on-screen the agenda, that would be great. Awesome, thank you. So very good afternoon, everyone from sunny Apia, Samoa. Great to see you all, despite the challenges of virtual Zooms, but it's always nice to connect once in a while. So just a very quick one through of the agenda. As we all know, this is quite a fairly short agenda for this afternoon or for today. Following my run through of the agenda, we'll just have a very short interactive poll with all the participants just to warm up the floor and sort of lead you nicely into the first PowerPoint presentation by Ms. Cassandra DeYoung, who will be introducing briefly the 4 fisheries SDG 14 indicators, and then followed by Q&A. And then we'll do another interactive poll just to touch base on what Cassandra has presented, and then I will present after that, pretty laying out the series of workshops that are lined out on these 4 indicators, followed by Q&A. We also have Speaker David Welsh, the expert, who we've also asked to kindly provide a brief outline of a regional mapping exercise in relation to one of the indicators, SDG 14.4.1, and then followed by Q&A, and then wrap up and closing. So it's a fairly straightforward agenda that we have in front of us. Please feel free to use the chat box, raise your hand if you have any questions, and yeah, use as much as possible this platform to interact with one another as well. We'll be pleased to hear your feedback of what we've got in store for this afternoon. I'll leave it at that, and just maybe perhaps in case anybody might have a question with regards to the agenda items at this stage, please raise your hand or unmute at this point if you're happy with the agenda. We can I'll pass the floor back to Charlene to move on to the next agenda. Okay, I see there's no one, so I guess we're good to go. Thank you for that, and over to you, Charlene. Thanks.
Thank you, Mele. So before we head on to the main workshop agenda, we'll be launching a poll right now. Okay. You should see a window pop up with 3 questions. If you don't see the pop-up, you could click the tab called polls at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you will see 3 questions there for you to answer. The 3 questions are: how many targets under SDG 14 live below water? The number 2 question is: how many fisheries-specific indicators under SDG 14, also under custodianship? And number 3, which SDG indicator relates to the rights of small fishes? So if you could kindly request everybody to select your answers for this. Okay, so I think we've got the answers coming in already. Great, so there was a nice quick teaser to the next session that we're going to move on to. And in the chat box, you will see details on the questions itself, the answers, and also some explanation, but we'll be hearing more in the next presentation that's coming up. And for that, I would like to invite Ms. Cassandra DeYoung, a senior fisheries expert with FAO, to give us the introduction to the 4 fisheries SDG 14 indicators. Cassandra, the floor is all yours.
Great, thank you, Charlene. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, great. Thank you. So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cassandra de Young, and I'm a fisheries consultant supporting the FAO regional office in the Pacific. And through my presentation, I hope to provide a quick overview of the Sustainable Development Goals indicator framework for those of you who are not familiar with it yet, and also to very briefly introduce you to the 4 fisheries-specific indicators within this framework. Within a short presentation, I won't do justice to the indicators, but my hope is through this quick review, will whet your appetite for the workshops and seminars and trainings to come over the next few months that Jessica has already mentioned and that Mele will introduce later on.
Okay.
No worries. All right. Can you turn to the next page, please? So building on the Millennium Development Goals, 193 member states of the UN adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. These goals span from the elimination of poverty to issues such as clean water and sanitation, combating and adapting to climate change, working toward peace, justice, and strong institutions. As Jessica mentioned, thanks in no small part to the Pacific region countries, the oceans have been identified as an important issue for sustainable development, which is a great acknowledgement of the ecosystem services and benefits that they provide to our societies, but also a stark reminder of the threats that they face. Thanks to this acknowledgement, a dedicated Sustainable Development Goal, number 14, Life Before Water, was created to help us raise awareness of the importance of our oceans and coasts, and to remind us of how interconnected they are, locally, regionally, and globally, as well as across landscapes and seascapes. Next. The SDG 14, Life Under Waters, has a goal to conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources. Within this goal, there are 10 targets that the countries identified as priority issues to address the land and marine-based threats such as marine pollution and litter, ocean acidification, destructive fishing practices and overfishing, and illegal and unreported and unregulated fishing, as well as harmful fisheries subsidies that exacerbate the problem by encouraging fishing overcapacity and leading to a situation where we have too many boats chasing too few fish. Next. Coming from fisheries, we have a tendency to focus on SDG 14, but it's really important to note that all the SDG goals are interrelated. As an example, we know very well of the importance of fish to provide food security and nutrition, and also to provide livelihoods in our fight against poverty. And we know that women, men, and youth play important roles along the fish value chains and support gender equality in communities. Next. So each of the 17 SDG goals has from 9 to 10 targets, and each of these targets has at least one indicator. So there are a total of 232 indicators that have been approved by the UN General Assembly back in 2017. This is a lot of indicators. It's a lot of information to gather and to share, but we do acknowledge that this is not an exhaustive set of indicators, and this limited number of indicators cannot represent all aspects of society and our efforts toward sustainable development. These indicators are a minimum set of indicators to provide proxy indicators to track our progress toward our goals. All countries are invited to monitor these indicators, as well as provide additional indicators that you feel better, more fully reflect your efforts through sustainable development. It's also important to note that this indicator framework is adaptable, Every year, there's the potential for minor changes to the indicators, and there's also a built-in extensive review, the first in 2020, and the next coming up in 2025. Next. So, who are formerly part of this indicator progressing system? Well, it starts at the national level with the national statistical offices working with the various line ministries to collect data related to the indicators. And through the national SDG focal points, this information is sent to the various custodian agencies around the world. Each indicator has its own custodian. For example, FAO is custodian for 21 indicators. The custodian agencies then send the estimations of the indicators to the interagency and expert group on SDG indicators, which has the task of reviewing the indicators. And this group comprises 28 countries around the world, and Fiji and Samoa are representing the Pacific region in this group. The agency then forwards the indicators to the UN Statistical Commission, whose task was to develop this indicator framework as well as to implement it and monitor it and to provide global reporting on it. Next, please. An example of such reporting is the annual Sustainable Development Goals report published by the Commission. As you can see in the contents on the right, it covers all 17 goals and provides a fairly brief snapshot of the status of the indicators and the goals globally. Next. What's really nice in your region is that there are also regional compilations of these indicators, which gives more context to the results so far for the region and to understand better what needs to happen to help further our goals. Next. So the role of each custodian agency. For each indicator, the custodian agency that has been identified must lead the methodological development of each indicator and document it and disseminate the methodology. The custodian agencies also should support the statistical capacity within the countries in order to collect and generate the data needed for the indicators, including support to implementation of any new data collection tools that may be required. The custodian agencies also help to improve the analysis and the use of the SDG indicators in decision-making at the national level, because this is really the crux of the use of these indicators. The custodian agencies also collect data from the national sources, ensure that they are comparable and consistent across the countries so that we can disseminate them at the global level. The custodian agencies also contribute to monitoring progress, not only at the global level, but also at the regional and national levels. Next. So the FAO was mandated to be custodian for 21 SDG indicators. And many are related to Goal 2, SDG Goal 2, relating to food security, which is the heart of FAO's work. But the other indicators also reflect the role of the agriculture sectors, including fisheries, in reaching gender equality, better use of water, sustainable food value chains, and healthy consumption, and in promoting healthy soils and forests and oceans. Over the last few years, FAO has been working with the countries and experts on the methodology and the data that are needed for these indicators, to the point where the vast majority of the indicators are now considered Tier 1 indicators, which means that there's a well-established methodology and that there are sufficient data for these indicators to provide meaningful results. Next. So very briefly, I'll now go through the 4 fisheries-specific indicators within the SDG framework that are under FAO's custodianship. Next. Before I go into the indicators, it's nice to look at the 4 targets under which these indicators fall. The first is target 14.4, which aims to improve fisheries management so that fish stocks are returned to levels where they are sustainably fished. Target 14.6 aims to eliminate harmful fishing subsidies. Target 14.7 aims to increase the economic benefits to SIDS and least developed countries from the sustainable use of marine resources, including tourism, fisheries, and aquaculture. And target 14.B, which ensures the access of small-scale fisheries to marine resources and markets. Next, please. The first indicator, 14.4.1, measures the sustainability of marine fisheries, capture fisheries. It does so by classifying fisheries as either biologically sustainable or biologically unsustainable, using the maximum sustainable yield reference level of abundance. For a given list of stocks, stock assessments are undertaken using various sources of information, such as fish catch statistics, fishing effort data, biological information, and other surrogate biomass measures. In the past, the FAO was monitoring this indicator globally without direct input from the countries. However, the FAO is now working with countries to improve and undertake stock assessments for those stocks exclusively within economic zones. Next. So one of the, you've probably already seen this through the State of Fisheries and Aquaculture that the FAO provides every 2 years. This gives a snapshot of the indicator of fish stock sustainability by major fishing areas. So for example, we can see that in the Western and Central Pacific, over 75% of those stocks that have been assessed are deemed to be fished at biologically sustainable levels. Next. The second indicator, 4.6.1, attempts to measure the efforts to combat illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. The data sources for this indicator come through the biannual survey on the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, which comes through the Committee on Fisheries of the FAO, and has a specific section within the broader survey that covers the implementation of 5 key global instruments used to combat IUU fishing, namely the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, the FAO Compliance Agreement, the UN Fish Stocks Agreement, the International Plan to Prevent, Deter, and Eliminate IUU Fishing, and the FAO Agreement on Port State Measures. The FAO then takes the responses to these questions to develop composite indicators. Next. And the indicators are expressed on a value from 0 to 5 in terms of level of implementation, 5 being the highest level of implementation. And this graphic shows that in the Pacific area, excluding Australia and New Zealand, those countries that responded in 2018 showed a high level of implementation of the international instruments to combat IUU fishing. Whereas in 2020, those countries that responded showed a lower level of implementation to combat IUU fishing. Next. So the third indicator, 14.7.1, tries to measure the economic benefits stemming from sustainable fisheries by calculating the contributions of marine capture fisheries to national gross domestic product. It's a theoretically simple indicator, but it's complicated in the sense that the value of the marine capture fisheries are adjusted by the degree of sustainability of these fisheries. So this indicator is directly linked to the 14.4.1 indicator of sustainability. And some of the constraints on this indicator is that often the data are not disaggregated for values among the various fisheries and aquaculture subsectors, or for inland and marine fisheries, and also the complications of limited stock assessments for national fisheries. Next. Even given these limitations, this indicator already shows in your region the extreme importance of fisheries, of marine capture fisheries in your region, as a provider of a very important economic support to your nation's economies. Next. So the fourth indicator, 14.B.1, attempts to measure the extent to which an enabling environment exists in support of small-scale fisheries. Similar to the IUU indicator, the FAO has a module within the Code of Conduct questionnaire, specifically relating to the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries in the context of food security and poverty eradication. The questions relate to the existence of laws, regulations, policies, plans, or strategies that specifically target or address the small-scale or coastal fisheries sector. The next set of questions dive more deeply into specific initiatives to implement the small-scale fisheries guidelines. So these ask questions, for example, on activities to support tenure security, value chains, gender equality, specifically in the small-scale fisheries sector. The third set of questions deal with the existence of mechanisms through which small-scale fisheries and fish workers can contribute to decision-making. So, for example, whether or not there is an advisory committee to fisheries management and that the small-scale fisheries sector are represented, how small-scale fisheries are involved in fisheries management, in data collection, in monitoring, control, and surveillance, and the like. The FAO then takes the results of these questions and, similar to the IUU indicator, develops a composite indicator for each country. Next. The results of the last two questionnaires show that the countries in the region are on par with many countries in the world in providing quite a significant amount of support to the coastal and small-scale fisheries sectors and communities. Next. So before I conclude, I wanted to give just a very brief overview of some of the things that the FAO is doing to support national and regional SDG supporting, as well as communicating on these indicators. The FAO undertakes a lot of global, regional, and national workshops, such as the regional workshop on the indicator 14.B.1 back in 2019. The FAO also has a dedicated SDG data and communication portal on which a lot of information on the methodologies and the data are available. The FAO also has a specific capacity development program for reporting on the indicators, which includes support to data collection, analysis, and dissemination. And we also work quite hard on the underlying support to these indicators with our regional partners on things such as stock assessments, implementation of the IUU instruments, improving our knowledge on fisheries economics and fisheries management, and implementation of the small-scale fisheries guidelines. In addition, the FAO has developed a nice suite of e-learning courses which are available online for free, including already 2 for the fisheries indicators on 14.B.1 and 14.4.1. And soon there will be an additional course on 14.7.1. So we invite everyone to look at these e-learning courses. Next. So some examples of how FAO is also trying to communicate the results of the indicators as well as experience in reporting on these indicators. So for example, a recent report on tracking progress on food and agriculture related indicators from 2020. It's a really nice compendium of the SDG indicators for which FAO is a custodian, and provides the results for every indicator so that countries in different regions can compare how their regions are doing relative to other regions around the world. Next. And also stemming from the 2019 workshop that I mentioned, my colleagues in the region have developed a report that will be coming soon, providing additional guidance specifically to the Pacific Island countries on the reporting of goal target 14.B and its indicator 14.B.1. Next. So a few concluding thoughts. The results today for the SDG fisheries in the Pacific are encouraging. The results help, I hope, demonstrate the efforts in the region towards sustainable and just fisheries. However, there are gaps, and reporting levels, although they are increasing, are relatively low for the region. So we hope that the upcoming workshops and trainings will help you in your SDG work, as well as in communicating your fisheries effort to others in the countries, in the regions, and around the world. Next. So thank you very much. I know that was very quick and I covered a lot of areas, but the great thing is that we will have dedicated workshops to respond more in depth to your questions and to share your experiences. So thank you very much. Back to you, Charlene. Or Mele, yeah.
Thank you, Cassandra, for that very nice introduction to the SDG 14 indicators. We will now open the floor for some questions, any clarifications, thoughts. So please feel free to raise your virtual hand, which you can do so by clicking on that reactions emoticon that you see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And you'll see there's something called raise hand. You can use that to make a live intervention, or you could place your questions, clarifications, or thoughts in the chat box. I think we see there's one right now from Andrew, SPC. The question is tuna included in these statistics?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. And before I answer, I would just wanted to thanks to the SPC, Alison, for correcting my my slide on the representations in the expert group. So before we share the presentation, which someone else asked for, I'll change that and make sure it's up to date. So Charlene, before we make it available, let me make that change. So thanks, Alison, for that. In terms of tuna, yes, tuna are included in the statistics, but let me have the real expert answer the question, because Stefania is online. Stefania, are you able to answer the more properly than I would? Stefania is our statistics expert in Rome.
Yes, they are included.
I guess perhaps more specifically on in which ways, in terms of the stock assessments, they're included, and perhaps maybe is the question related to how are they included nationally in terms of, for example, the economics, and these sorts of questions.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my logic behind it was because in terms of how effective the tuna fishing side of things is versus the coastal fishery side of things, can paint two very different pictures. So I was just wondering how much you separate the two, because in a way, tuna, the quality or the health of the tuna situation could mask a lot of the issues that are going on in the coastal fishery space.
Yes, clearly, I'm still Stefania. It clearly depends on, I suppose you were talking about 14.4.1, and clearly depends on regional, on share stocks covered by region, by, for example, by SPC versus the national one, and so this will discover more during the specific trainings on 14.4.1. For the it also depends if covering 14.7.1, so on the value. So this depends clearly shared versus national stocks clearly, but there are also tunas on the national one.
Mele or Charlene, can I jump in? This is Annalise.
Yes, Anne, please go ahead.
Hi, so I'm Annalise Nieblas. I am a fisheries consultant supporting SDG 14.4.1 for FAO. I just wanted to clarify that, yes, that tuna are included for the global and regional indicators, but they are, but when we are talking about the 14.4.1 questionnaire that's sent to individual countries, we specifically request that the straddling stocks such as tuna are excluded from the questionnaire. So this then helps to make that distinction between coastal and straddling.
Thank you, Anne, Stefania. Do we have any other questions? We still have about 5 minutes or so for the session. Perhaps countries would like to share their experience quickly. Okay. I don't see any questions as yet so far in the chat, or nobody wants to raise hand. Okay, so I guess, thank you, Cassandra, for that very nice presentation again. So what we'll do is, in continuation of Cassandra's presentation, we have a follow-up question. And this, we will be doing it using Mentimeter. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with it, but we'd like to try this. And there's just one question. And we kindly request if you could, maybe first I'll get Aftar to share the screen, Aftar, on the question. We'd
Sure.
like to invite you to minimize your Zoom screen and go to this menti.com and use the code that you see right now on the screen. We also have the link on the chat box. So you can either minimize your screen and go to the browser to get this, or if you have another device, your mobile phone or your iPad or another computer, you can also go as well. And we'd like you to give us your answer to this question. Great, we see answers coming up. So the question is, do you feel the 4 fisheries-specific SDG 14 indicators capture well your country's or organization's efforts to attain the sustainable development goals through the fishery sector? So you could answer either as a yes or a no. Questions are coming in. If at all you're having issues trying to connect to the website, you could also answer these questions in the chat box. You could also put in your answers yes or no in the chat box, or experience trying to vote using menti.com. The question again is, do you feel the 4 fisheries-specific SDG 14 indicators capture well your country's or organization's efforts to attain the SDG goals through the fisheries sector? We'll probably wait about a minute or so before the others can trying to connect. Okay, we have some responses in the chat as well. We have about 60 participants today from all the countries in the region.
Yeah, thanks everyone. If I can just jump in here,
Sure.
Mele here. And thanks, Charlene, for facilitating this. This is more no right or wrong answer to this, obviously, but clearly we've got a majority of responses to this question is yes, it's positive, so that's great to know. But just out of curiosity, just to, it's nice to perhaps get a little bit of understanding from those who responded no, as to your reasons behind this. This is a really interesting sort of perspective for us to understand a bit more. So anybody who responded, one of the 4, who's brave enough to take the floor and share with us? Perhaps, this could be something that is worth listening. It's good to hear your feedback with regards to how not well these indicators are capturing your national efforts or regional efforts. Any one of the 4 would like to, brave enough to share your thoughts on this? Yeah, if not, that's fine too. It's just out of curiosity to know if there's some additional thoughts around perhaps other types of, I guess, indicators or approaches that you feel work better in your national or regional efforts. Okay, so worth a try. At least I tried.
Mele, we have from Samoa.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't see your hand there. Please go ahead, Francella. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mele. I'm not going to say whether we said yes or no. Well, there's 8 of us here, so there was a bit of a debate here. I think you should have put one where it's kind of like in between, because I guess it depends on which indicator. Like you said, this can't be a hard yes or no answer, because if you really look at, I'm speaking from across the SDGs, because you're saying whether it captures well your country's efforts. And I think sometimes these indicators, they only capture part of your efforts. And then it kind of measures your efforts in a very limited way. I guess that's just my general response to this. I mean, we all understand these are global indicators, and it was very difficult to try and come up with them. And if you see from our report last year, and I think, Mele, we had a really good discussion where the way we did it with Samoa is, even if we didn't have data, we tried to highlight some of the key initiatives, which are really transformational, but it's really hard to put in a little box in terms of the indicators that do exist. And for me, it's not just about these fish indicators, it cuts across on a lot of the SDGs. And for Samoa, when we were doing our second VNR, that was a key part of our multi-sectoral discussions. Even if we cannot collect data, how do we still try and reflect our efforts, and how do we still measure them by giving stories and giving the impacts on some of the efforts that we put in terms of SDG implementation. So I guess that's just to respond to your very general question. And yeah, it may apply to some of the fisheries one, but this was based on some of the feedback that we got from our consultations last year when we were trying to measure the SDG 14. But it wasn't just from this, because there's different kinds of data. So and sometimes it shows that you're doing well, but because you're trying to apply certain indicators, it does not reflect the efforts of the country and the direct impact on the ground. And while I still have the floor, I know we were talking about from our progress report last year, we were talking, I don't know which indicator in the presentation that mentioned that some of the data was measured globally, but we're still trying to work at the national level to do them. But I know for some of these even global indicators, most of the Pacific still had no data on it, even if it's measured globally rather than nationally. So, and again, for us, and as you rightly mentioned, the Pacific fought really hard for this goal, and it was really important to have the indicators. Yet, for such an important goal, we can't even, you know, talk about how, because we're doing so much in the Pacific, yet we come out as no data when we had to report, which kind of doesn't go together with the political message that we try and put out there. So I think those are just some of the issues I wanted to highlight based on that question. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Francella. And I commend you for those wonderful points that you shared, you know, particularly wearing your hat as, you know, from a national SDG focal point. Those are, you know, the practicality that you've experienced yourself in reporting on these indicators. That is the very great feedback that you're sharing in this forum, and excellent what you brought up with the VNRs. Those are opportunities, and, you know, within your own reach, because these are reported, you know, led by the national SDG focal points with the different sectors, and it is at your own reach and your own, I guess, your decisions on how you capture as much as possible the efforts that are made at the national level so that it's reflected globally. But thank you for that, Francella, and I see Cassandra's hand is also up, and Cassandra, please go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Melaine. Thanks to Samoa. It's great that the question started a conversation in your group. That was already a great objective met. One issue that came up in the 2019 workshop organized by Jessica and Mele and colleagues in Rome was, where do freshwater fisheries come in? And also aquaculture is also apparently missing in the SDG 14 indicators. So I think this is also an area where many countries are feeling a little bit frustrated, but it's important to know that, for example, freshwater fisheries more or less finds home in the SDG 6, which is dealing with freshwater and freshwater ecosystems. But it's really important to make sure that the fisheries and aquaculture sectors are well represented throughout the SDG indicators, because there are some areas where these 4 fisheries-specific indicators are necessary, but they certainly do not suffice to tell the whole story. And providing those examples and those stories that you're doing, for example, in Samoa, I think is fantastic. Your comment on no data, yes, I think this is exactly why one of the reasons for having the workshops and the trainings over the next few months is to understand why countries are not reporting, because we know there are a lot of efforts going on. Is it just a matter of not understanding properly the question, or can we respond to the question partially, and these sort of things. So over the next few months, it'll be, I think, we hope this will help improve reporting on the SDG indicators relating to fisheries. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Cassandra. I think over to you, Charlene, unless there's any other questions. I think we're, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mele. Thank you, Cassandra, and thank you, Samoa, for that discussions that we had. So great. So we'll move on next to our agenda, and I would like to now invite Mele again to give us the outline of the upcoming technical workshops and the trainings on the 4 fisheries SDG 14 indicators. Mele, over to you.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Good afternoon again, everyone. I am just on the screen. Please, Charlene, could you confirm if my PowerPoint is up on the screen?
Yes, Mele.
Yes, all okay.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so just once again, good afternoon. And with this talk, I'll be outlining a series of the technical workshops that have been planned for the region on these 4 fisheries indicators, the SDG 14 indicators. Just to acknowledge that the FAO Sub-Regional Office for the Pacific has been working closely with our FAO colleagues in Rome to plan out the series of the workshops, as they are the focal points for these indicators. And just to I guess acknowledge once again the presence of a wide range of people in this workshop. You know, we don't just have national fisheries agencies. We've got some representatives from statistics offices. We've got, of course, national SDG focal points, and even our regional partners. So this is I felt like this was the best platform to explain to you all a bit more in detail of what these workshops are looking like. And of course, we welcome any feedback from the floor on ways to improve our planning. So just to get right into it is the, you know, what are the different workshops, when they will happen, what will they cover, and who needs to be there. And the main, I guess the main events are these 6 core ones, so the inception workshop that we're here today for. And on each of the indicators, there are workshops for them. 14.4.1 has 2 parts, 1 part in theory, 1 part practical. And then there's a closing workshop at the end. I'll explain a bit more in detail in the coming slides about each of these events. But just to also note that there are also some activities that are happening in parallel or complementary to help inform the agenda of these workshops, to ensure that you know, that the trainings are tailored according to the regions or the country's current situations and their needs. So this is the workshop series timeline over the next coming months. We're looking at the August, July, August, September, October period. Some of you might recall we originally shared a concept note with proposed months for the different workshop series, so it's been slightly adjusted, largely to importantly take into account you know, the not to clash with regional fisheries meetings that are already filling up everyone's calendars in this second half of the year, but also proposed in a way to group them, given that there's quite a few of these workshops or trainings lined up, and it'll probably be easier for countries to follow, and also for the organizers as well, but to group them in a way they could be back to back where possible. And part of it is also to do with the target audiences, and I'll explain about that a little bit later. But while on the slide, the first group, for example, on SDG 1441 Part 1 and 14B1 targets a very similar target audience, the coastal fisheries staff within the national fisheries agencies. But this is just an overall look at what the timeline looks like with the workshop series, and I'll explain a bit later. I'll explain now in more detail the specific dates proposed and the details of each workshop. So with the first group, this is both very technical in nature. The first workshop, Part 1 for SDG 1441 is theoretical. And as I mentioned earlier, there's some work in parallel and preparatory work leading up to this training, in which David Welsh will explain a bit more in detail following my talk. But basically, this regional mapping exercise on coastal fisheries data collection that will inform an expert roundtable discussion is also to help shape up the agenda for the Part 1 training on this particular indicator. But so far, what we're looking at is, of course, introducing the concept and the methodology itself. As Annalise mentioned earlier, we're looking for this particular indicator, we're looking at national stocks, so it doesn't include the straddling or the tuna one. So we're looking at national reporting, looking at coastal fishery stocks in this regard, and national reporting processes of the indicator. There's some concepts for stock monitoring on classic and data limited methods. Data limited methods, it's something that we're strongly highlighting and focusing in these workshops for 1441, given that we are mindful of the limited or poor data in coastal fisheries in the region that we're experiencing across the countries. And of course, planning for the second part of the training for this indicator. The proposed dates is as shown on screen, the 30th of August to the 1st of September. It's covering 3 days. And as mentioned earlier, it targets coastal fisheries staff within our national fisheries agencies, particularly those who are involved directly in coastal fisheries data collection programs and fish stock monitoring. And then the second workshop of the first group is that on 14B1. Because we've already had a regional workshop on this particular indicator 2 years ago in 2019, we'd like to, it's more of a refresher, if you like. We'll still explain again in detail what exactly is the methodology for this indicator. One of the main recommendations from the 2019 workshop was to develop some guidance for countries on how to better report on this indicator. So we'll be presenting and sharing with you this published document at this workshop. And the participatory process in reporting on this indicator is one of the key concepts of this indicator, where we're trying to encourage the national focal points within the fisheries agencies to consult and work closely with the fishers or fishers associations or representatives of fishers or CSOs, if you like, so that they are engaged or included in the consultations before reporting on this indicator. So we just want to highlight that and see, discussions on ways that we could perhaps work or improve in this area. And then, of course, identify capacity development needs from countries with regards to this indicator. It's been proposed for the 2nd of September, so back to back with the 1441 workshop, and it's covering 1 day, and again targeting coastal fisheries staff within our national agencies, and particularly those involved in directly answering the FAO CCRF survey that is sent out to the fisheries agencies. This 3 questions of this survey directly relates to this particular indicator. It is nicely reminded by our SPC colleagues that the focal points are those within national fisheries agencies who respond to the coastal fisheries report card that is disseminated by SPC, and it's the same people who are also attending this very workshop. And we hope it is the same people who are actually answering the FAO CCRF survey on this related to this indicator. So just to just to illustrate where the regional mapping exercise on 1441 and the expert roundtable discussion is in relation to the workshop series. The regional mapping is happening at the moment, leading into the expert roundtable, which we plan with SBC to have proposed to have in mid-August. And this will overall inform the part 1 training for SDG 1441. Now the second group of workshops, this is for 1461 and 1471, and you'll see that the target audience, the country level, is not just targeting our coastal fisheries staff, but also offshore. For 1461, because this is in relation to IUU fishing, it's of course introducing SDG 14 IUU fishing related targets, but also important to highlight and to recognize the efforts of the region in combating IUU fishing, which we know there's a lot of work done here, for example, in the oceanic fisheries of tuna. So it's highly recognizing those efforts to combat IUU, introducing or unpacking the indicator methodology and its tool to assist, and there's a tool also developed to assist your country reporting and define additional support needs. Excuse me. So the proposed dates is 2 days, 5th and 6th of October, and targeting both coastal and oceanic fisheries staff working in issues related to IUU fishing. And then the second workshop of that group is the 1471 workshop. Again, introducing the indicator methodology. The methodology itself has important components on the economic side and the sustainability side. So it's really unpacking that and understanding what these two components mean. And the interesting part of work on this particular indicator is because at the moment we don't have national data on this, and would like to trial out the methodology with 2 or 3 countries in the region to test it out and see how it goes with that, and the plan is to then share those outcomes and results with countries at the closing workshop. But and as we've heard earlier in the workshop, is countries may not be reporting on this, and this is the opportunity to start trialing them out for this particular indicator, and be able to identify what needs to be done to improve the coordination between statistics offices and fisheries offices, and also with FAO to improve the data that needs to be collected. But also define additional support needs around this. The proposed date is the 7th of October, so back to back. It's a 1-day workshop. Importantly, noting the target audience is within national fisheries agencies, our coastal oceanic staff working on economic statistics. Yes, this is in relation to any export data, market data, production data with value. Those sorts of statistics is needed. Any staff working around these statistics will be useful. And also, it specifically also targets those in the national statistics offices, particularly those who are working on national accounts and fishery statistics. And then the country trials would be ideally happening leading up to informing the 1471 workshop itself, but also results or outcomes of these trials would like to share during the closing workshop. And then the final group of workshops is the part 2 of the 1441 training. And this is, of course, the more hands-on practical one. There's a specific questionnaire on this indicator that will enable countries to play around with. There's some hands-on training on catch-only methods and length-based methods. These are methods that are, as mentioned earlier, nice to focus on, or at least highlight, provide capacity training in, given the data limited situation with most of the data on coastal fisheries in the Pacific. and then define any additional support needs around that. And those dates proposed so far is the 25th to 27th of October, so 3 days. And again, the same people who are attending the training part 1 is targeted for this practical training in part 2. And then the final closing of the wrap-up workshop is, again, bringing everyone who is here today, the key from national fisheries agencies to statistics offices, national SDG focal points. We would like to present with you key outcomes of all the trainings and the workshops that we've delivered thus far. And as I mentioned earlier, including outcomes of these country trials that we've planning to do on SDG indicator 14.7.1 and define next steps. And this is proposed back to back to the part 2 14.4.1 training on 28th of October for 1 day. And in terms of workshop times, it's of course very challenging given the time zone, the major time zone difference between the Pacific and Rome, where most of our resource people are based, who will be helping to deliver these workshops, and sort of try to find the middle ground of what time might work for everyone. In fact, for example, it's 4 a.m. I think in Rome right now. And so for the workshop times, we're trying to make a time that might hopefully suit the Pacific majority of our countries, but also hopefully not too early in the wee hours of the morning for our colleagues and friends joining from the other side of the Pacific in Rome, for example. And so far the proposed time, start time would be around 11 a.m. Samoa time, much earlier than today, for example. And the duration per day for each workshop is maximum 2 to 3 hours, as we know it's challenging to go beyond that through a virtual setting. In terms of workshop invitations, particularly for our SEP countries, for the countries under the sub-regional office, to national fisheries agencies, perhaps in a way to help streamline or help make it easier for submitting through your nominations. We'd like to send just a single invitation to each of your national fisheries agencies for all the different workshops. And we'll develop a template to guide your nominations with a clear profile of the recommended staff or target staff that for each of the workshops. For national statistics offices, because the 14.7.1 workshop is also specifically targets your offices as well. So proposed here to also have a single invitation for the SDG 14.7.1 workshop and the closing workshop, and a template to also guide your nomination process. And finally, for the national SDG focal points, for sure the closing workshop, would be great to have you there as well. And the idea is perhaps to copy you in invitations to the National Fisheries Agency, should you wish to attend the specific technical workshops. And just by saying this, it does not mean that you cannot be invited to, workshop this or workshop that. This is just to help, I guess, from the organizer's side, how to plan this out. And if you're, of course, interested to attend a particular workshop of any kind, you're most welcome to contact myself or Charlene from INFOFISH with regards to attending any of these workshop series. And the same goes for we have some members outside the region who may be interested, most welcome to join. Please flag it to myself or Charlene. And then just to wrap up is probably just a few I guess highlights that we'll be showcasing at the workshop with to hopefully help facilitate explaining of these indicators, facilitate understanding of how these indicators are actually calculated. There's some tools developed by the team, as well as some guidance materials, some learning materials to share with you. And also importantly, just your feedback, verbal feedback that we're having through these virtual platforms to facilitate discussions and to, take into consideration the issues, experiences that your countries are facing with regards to reporting on any of these indicators. These are pretty much the whole point of having these workshop series, is to ensure that what we're planning to provide, deliver, and train on is something useful and worthwhile for you to implement in the end. And with that, that's it, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mele, for that interesting overview on what's coming up and what can be expected over the next couple of months. So we'll be opening the floor again for questions, thoughts, and any comments, suggestions. Again, please feel free to raise your virtual hand or put into the chat box if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions.
Happy to take any questions or comments or feedback. Unless I was very, very, very clear and too clear that no confusion there. Happy to take any questions. We have a little bit of time before I pass over to David to share his talk on the regional mapping. Our friends also tuning in from Bangladesh, more than happy to take any questions you might have as well. Co-observers to this call. Sure, I see a comment from Marcella. Oh, definitely, yes, we'll be sharing the copies of the PowerPoints today. Yep, today is possible. Thanks for that, Marcella. We have a question from Alison. SBC, are you able to confirm the three countries that will be doing the 1471 work? At this point, I thank you, Alison, for the question. At this point, we do have 3 countries in mind, and these were carefully selected based on, well, 2 were carefully identified based on having very robust national accounts, as I understand, and they are Samoa and Fiji. We have yet to, of course, confirm these with the countries. This is just part of the preliminary planning, because if we're trialing the methodology, it'd have to be with a country that has some good data or some good national accounts, good systems in place that will enable us to trial out the methodology. Kiribati was the 3rd country that was suggested by SPC, I believe it was Andy, based on some good data on coastal fisheries that is coming, that they're working on at the moment, that would probably help inform this. We've yet to confirm as well from Kiribati with the country with regards to that. But we do have the 3 in mind so far. So thank you, Alison, for the question. There's a raised hand from Samoa. Samoa fisheries?
Yeah, it was Samoa just now.
Yes, please go ahead. Unmute and go ahead. Thank you.
Yep. Well, anyways, thanks, Millie. A very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for that presentation. It was well delivered, clear. Just a couple of comments, Millie, on the presentation, and I won't be commenting on the presentation, but just general comments, especially as fisheries people who are providing the data for this. I have to bring to the attention that that it is the same data that a lot of regional organizations and a lot of international organizations are asking, from national fisheries agencies. So, it would be really good to probably consider a system that whatever is supplied to FAO is also shared, to other regional or other international organizations who are also after the same data. We're finding it at the ground level that, we are pretty much stretched out thinly on the ground because, there is a request coming from FAO, there's a request coming from here and there, and then, and it's the same data. And I must also bring to the attention of the meeting that FAO request for data and the system that is used for the CCRF, it's not friendly. It's not really friendly, and it's good to reconsider how we look at that at those systems. It's so here we are voicing the technical side of things and how that information should be verified as well, to make sure things are sort of well coordinated, by that side. Last comment, Melly, sorry, I said a couple, but make it three now. The last comment is probably we've been over-zoomed, and looking at that calendar and the plan for upcoming workshops. It's we also engage in other in other Zoom meetings, and we do accept the fact that we are now living in a virtual world, but we also need to plan things out, so that things are well taken care of, not only from international perspective and regional perspective, but as well as the national level. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Mangele. Always good to hear from you. I think those are really the point you mentioned about the national the capacity to provide all sorts of data to the regional agencies and international. That is indeed a very valid point you've raised. A very difficult one that I could answer at this point. I think we're all very much aware of the situation. If I can recall from the 14B1 workshop we had two years ago on this indicator in Nandi, that was very similar issue brought up is how can the data on that we report to the CCRF survey can also inform the SPC Coastal Fisheries Report Card. It was a very challenging discussion we had, and to date, I think this is something that FAO will still continue to try and work closely with our regional partners. I think this is still an area that we'll need to try and work as much as possible, not just for 14B1, but for all the other three fisheries indicators to help streamline the reporting. One thing that we did encourage was, if it's the same people reporting, on the FAO survey, for example, we hope that it is the same people who are also reporting, for example, to the SPC surveys. In that way, it's the same data that we're receiving. But in terms of using the same data channel, that is definitely an issue. And I think we can continue to have some very solid discussions around that with our regional partners, at least to help the region with, this overburdening of reporting. So thank you, Mangele, for that. Well noted about being over-zoomed. That's a new term. I quite like that, over-zoomed. And yeah, we do hope that the way we've planned out at least these series, the way they are grouped and the way they are back-to-back, they're 1 day, 2 days, I think 3 days max, but that's only for one of the indicators training. We hope that in some way it's sort of lessening, you know, the keeping you guys online for this. But we certainly do feel that I think everyone's pretty much zoomed out. And if there's any other suggestions, I guess, if you know, to help us in planning out of these workshops outside of Zoom, then yeah, that's a really hard one. But thank you for that, Magali. Appreciate it. How are we with time, Charlene?
Yeah, I think we are just on time, but we have David's presentation.
Yep, sure. Okay, so thank you again, and I think I won't take the floor much. I'll back to you, Charlene and David. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mele. We'll now hear about the regional mapping exercise for the SDG 14.4.1, as mentioned by Mele, and I'd like to call upon Mr. David Welsh, Principal and Senior Scientist at the C2O Fisheries. Over to you, David.
Okay, thank you very much, Charlene and Mele. So yeah, I'm just going to keep it brief today. Obviously, we've just talked about over-zooming, and we all have been experiencing that. So I'm very aware of that. I'll keep it brief. Charlene, I think you've got my presentation. Are you able to put that up? So while that's coming up, everybody, yeah, I guess good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. As I said, I'm going to try and keep it fairly brief. And it really is just focused on a component which is focused on indicator 14.4.1, which is the sustainability of fish stocks and measuring against that. So so what my job will be in that process is mapping data collection activities related to specifically coastal fisheries throughout the Pacific. So I know that for many of you, I've already been in contact and I've had some consultations back. Thank you for that. And also I've been handing out a questionnaire as part of that process. Some of you have even returned those already. Again, very much appreciated. Thank you. There are others going out to territories very soon after this workshop. Here we go. Thank you, Charlene. So if you could just go to the next slide. So as I said, it's about mapping data collection activities in the Pacific. And again, it relates only to 14.4.1, which is the indicator that looks at the portion of fish stocks within biological sustainable levels. You've all heard about that earlier. And it does focus only on coastal fish species. Next. And just in terms of the high level goals, it's really about determining by looking at what data collection activities are currently taking place, how that they can be used or improved to accommodate the needs of stock assessment and reporting on indicator 14.4.1, but also to generally improve and facilitate fisheries data and statistics reporting. And I think we're all aware of that capacity and resourcing is very limited across the board. We just heard from Samoa Fisheries about being stretched thin because of the multiple different avenues that data is being asked from. I think as we move through this process, one of the hopes and the goals is also to understand what data collection activities are taking place with a view to providing support that will help streamline and improve and make more consistent so that they meet national needs and fit in with national priorities, but also are better able to report against indicator 14.4.1. Next. Yeah, you'll have to keep clicking. Sorry, it's there's animations in here. So the approach, just to make you aware of how I'm going to go about collecting this information is, as I've already alluded to, firstly is collecting information. So that's involving consultation with countries and territories, but also other relevant entities such as NGOs and places like the University of Hawaii. And principally that's through a questionnaire to learn about what data collection activities are taking place or have been taking place, types of data, how they're collected. And that gives us a means to look at that information to then go on to the next stage, which I'll be looking at summarising it, seeing what's available and how well the current information reports against indicator 14.4.1 and what new data are needed to improve this, and perhaps what new approaches or ways of collecting those data, and how can the new data be used for reporting of indicator 14.4.1. So there are currently different assessment approaches available that are data limited, that are appropriate, and we want to be flexible and also look at, based on the information available, the capacity and the challenges in the Pacific, what other possible approaches could we also incorporate that helps make it easier for you to report and assess your own stocks. That brings me to another part of it. There are capacity building opportunities here whereby, and this gets back to this question before of trying not to be overstretched, is if we can harmonise data collection strategies, identify the challenges and work through those, but also then use those as opportunities to identify where and how FAO and or SBC can assist Pacific Island countries to bring those approaches, data collection approaches, assessment approaches, and align them, then I think that will help streamline things and make better use of limited resources across the board. So leading into that even further, part of my role will be to work with countries in developing a reference list of key stocks. So these will be at a regional, but also a national level. And they might be based on their importance or their value locally. They could be based on a number of things. With coastal fisheries, obviously there's many species. We need to select key indicator species out of that, and I'll do that by working with you. And also collating what is known about their life history, for example. So these sorts of, having these reference lists, having this baseline information really helps build that baseline of information to then have more streamlined data collection and more targeted, but also consistent assessment approaches that also help feed into indicator 14.4.1. There's a number of other things tied up in that. We want to make sure that we identify key gaps, lessons learnt from elsewhere and in the Pacific in coming up with the best approach across monitoring and assessment, but also we've also talked about already about different focal points and who I'll be needing to contact and liaise with throughout this process. So making clear on who those people are and for ongoing reporting in the future. Next slide. So that leads into the workshop series, which you've all heard about during this meeting today. Essentially, the results from carrying out this data mapping exercise will be presented for discussion with regional experts initially. That'll be at the roundtable meeting in mid-August. And then that'll help us to inform how we structure the 14.4.1 part 1 and part 2 workshops, in which we'll use the results and also further value add to those results by hearing from you at those workshops. And you've already heard that during the workshops, there'll be some training, and the training will be helping you to have the capacity to identify what are the key stocks in your country, what data collection is needed, assessment approaches that are simple and appropriate to your situation, and then applying that to be able to report to indicator 14.4.1. Hopefully while also fitting in with and aligning with what's already happening nationally, so that it's not adding further work and being a burden, but fitting in and aligning so that it is overall becoming a more streamlined approach. Now I'm just going to go back to the timelines that Melee's just gone through, simply because those questionnaires, they are tight. The questionnaires will go out to territories this week, and they've already gone out to other countries. We want to be able to collate the information from mid-August for the roundtable, and then prepare for the later that month, the part 1 workshop. So I am asking for questionnaires by the end of July. So hopefully that's not going to put an extra burden. It's a simple questionnaire, and I'm happy to work through it with you. Thank you to those who have sent them in already, and for the rest of you, thank you for your time, and I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you, David, for that quick presentation on the regional mapping exercise. We'll probably can take 1 or 2 questions if there are any questions that participants or countries would like to check with regards to the regional mapping exercise with David. Please feel free to raise your hand or put your questions in the chat box. Don't see any questions right now so far. Okay.
There'll be other opportunities for that, because I will be in touch with just about everybody.
Yes.
Eventually. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, David. So I guess we've come to the end of this workshop today, and I'd like now to give the floor to our colleagues from FAO. Melee, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Charlene, and thanks everyone for still staying in with us. So just some very quick wrap up notes before we close off is when first upon the list is when to expect these invitations to the workshop series. I think the FAO and INFOFISH will work hard to have these invitations out by the first week or early August, so that it allows you time to work on the nominations and submit. As I mentioned earlier, this is the single invitation that will have all the workshop series in there for your nominations. The Secretariat may also reach out to the National Fisheries Agencies for your help in reaching out or getting hold of contacts with your national statistics offices or your national SDG focal points where we're not where FAO INFOFISH does not have that information. We'll reach out to our fisheries counterparts to help with us in that regard, so that we ensure that the invitations reach them well. Most certainly, we will share the PowerPoints of the talks today with all the participants. So thanks for the reminder. And yeah, if we've certainly taken into account the comments and the feedback we've received following both the presentations, the interventions that we received. These are well acknowledged and taken on board. But yeah, without further ado, I don't think I have anything else to share in terms of wrap up, but just to thank you all very much for tuning into this workshop. We surely appreciate your time taken, and we hope that you found it useful. And please, at any time, you're more than welcome to contact myself, the team from FAO, and Charlene, INFOFISH, at any point. If you have any questions about these planning of the series, feel free to contact us. But without further ado, just a big malo apito, and thank you, Fatai Lava, to everyone, and hope you have a good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks
Goodbye,
to
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you. Okay, see you.